Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to my fellow legislators and the great crowd that we have here today. It's a pleasure to speak with you. I want to give special thanks to those people from the 52nd District that thought it worthwhile to send me here. As a first-term Assembly rep, I joined this illustrious group, and I bring my background and my experiences and my observations into this room. Anyone that's been elected in the first few months, you are continually asked, so how's it going? What's it like? Not wanting to tell them how to build a watch, I've tried to simplify the answer, and you haven't disappointed me today because I tell them it's entertaining to listen to the give and take and the back and forth. That continues. I'll also say the observations I had before coming into this office of how government does or doesn't work pretty much are holding true. The problems that I see from a private sector perspective, that's what's going on around us. As a former bank president, what I worked with were numbers. Numbers and ratios, outcomes, measurements, metrics, what works, what doesn't. It wasn't the numbers that were interesting, it was the story behind the numbers. The stories told me about the people I was working with. The stories told me, are they doing well at their job? Can they multitask? Can they run multiple departments? Do they need improvements in certain areas? Do they need to step up because they're sliding in one area or another? When you make a loan from a bank, that bank's making an investment in people. And that's what we should be doing here as well. And to that extent, we look at the conversation that comes up frequently in all of our districts, and that is, what happens to all of this money that the government gives to these different programs? Is it working? Is it not working? There's just too much unaccountable money. It's tough enough at times here in Wisconsin, but if you look at D.C., they've lost their collective minds when it comes to spending the money of the citizens of this country. Oftentimes, the claim to fame is that we passed a bill, we funded it, and we sent it off into the agency universe. But if somebody asks you 2 years later, is it working? Well, we think so. We intended it to work, but we really don't know. Well, why don't you know? Because we don't measure it. We don't have any metrics. If you were in the private sector and you approached your business that way, and you didn't understand where you were making money and where you were losing money, where you had good efficiencies and didn't have efficiencies, you'll be out of business. But those businesses that use all of those metrics, their chance of success is much, much higher. And that really should be our goal as legislators working with the agencies here in Wisconsin. We are the stewards of the people's money. We need to be just as diligent in managing the money and the resources and the people in government as the private sector is with their various forms of assets. It was a question brought up in hearing, was it necessary for this body to pass this legislation? And the answer is, what else were you sent here for? I've listened to people that when they were here during the pandemic, you just didn't have anybody responding. Somebody has to establish the boundaries, the rules, and measure what the level of performance is. If we come to this bill, in 2021, the Wisconsin Legislative Council investigated the organization of our workforce development system. They found that, and there's interesting language, at least 45 different workforce development programs here in Wisconsin. And they're spread out over 9 different agencies, and by and large, they don't talk to one another. How the heck do we know if this is working or not? Unfortunately, this body doesn't know what's effective and what's not, and I think if there's anything that's really important is to know that we are creating opportunities for people and that those are effective programs and they're producing the results that are needed both by the government and the families that are involved. The goal of the bill is to gather metrics to measure whether or not our workforce development programs are meeting their goals. I just find it hard to argue against that. That just makes sense to me. So what we want is to take federal programs, as a number already are producing metrics that go to the federal government, and as noted by my peer from the 93rd, the federal government wants some measurements. We just want universal measurements across the board for all of our Wisconsin administered programs. So, significant but simple change, I think, will produce better results for this organization. And with that, I'd ask you to join me in something that doesn't look like 60-35 and pass this as a green today. Thank you very much.